Okay, thank you. I'm Claire Donovan from the University of Greenwich. Here's our lovely campus on the banks of the River Thames, the old Royal Naval College. So I'm posing a question: do we need a feminist bibliometrics? And this is something, now for something a little bit more different. I'd like to acknowledge that this research is coming out of, like Louise mentioned earlier, that it's rare to get funding in this area. This was an Australian Research Council discovery grant on gendered excellence in the social sciences, and the project just starting to wind up now. And I'm collaborating with Fiona Jenkins, Helen Keane and Marion Sawyer, who are all at the Australian National University, and I'm the international PI on the project, and there's a link there for if anybody wants to know more about the project. Okay, so the background: excellence and gender inequality. There is extensive evidence in the academic literature of gendered practices in higher education which are affecting women's career progression. Now, often getting data is a problem, so a great deal of the literature is based on interviews or on experiments. So all other things being equal, there are gendered practices that sort of discriminate, that have a detrimental effect for women in higher education careers. And so this is in the area of recruitment, so getting in the first place, promotion and tenure, and also about what we consider to be excellence in academic careers. So the idea is that what's counted as being the best is often gendered, and in fact, who are the people making the policy and the decisions about what counts as excellent, and quite often women are not included in those conversations. Now, so there's recruitment, there's promotion, there's the idea of excellence. Now, beyond that, I'm sure we're all familiar with research on teaching evaluations, that all other things being equal, tend to be more biased, more negative for women, and especially in the more sort of mathematical subjects. And also this is related to the younger a woman is, the more likely they are to get negative student feedback. Now, also, there's gender inequity has been found in terms of winning research grants and panel judgments, and also in terms of broader impact on society. There's some interesting research showing that women actually engaging, promoting their research using social media are more likely to encounter structural systemic violence, with the knock-on effect that women researchers potentially are being silenced because of this hostility. So this is sort of the background that we're dealing with. Then we come on to publication, and it's publication that I want to focus on today. So in terms of publication and gender inequity, again, the literature reveals evidence of gendered practices in higher education that affect publication. So one area is productivity, that for gendered reasons, women actually produce less or have less opportunities to collaborate in teams with male colleagues. At the peer review stage, again, there's evidence of processes being detrimental to women, especially when their gender is identified. But we have a quote here: of course, female academics do get published, but that's only half the battle. There's evidence of gendered practices affecting citation numbers, and this is where I'm getting on to, do we need a feminist bibliometrics? So there's a phenomenon called the gender citation gap, whereby women just receive proportionately far less citations. Their male colleagues often are not citing their work. And there's a much lower visibility of feminist and gender research studies as well. And okay, so I'll show you something here. So this was several years ago now, 2018, CERN hosted a conference for young women in physics, and a guy turned up and basically presented lots of citation data showing that he himself, third one down, wasn't hired, but look at his citation rates. If there's any bias in science, it's actual sort of gender diversity programs, he argued in front of all these young women, is actually biased against men and damaging men's careers. And he provided all sorts of citation data, even saying that the person in charge of hiring had less citations than him. How dare they? But I would say this is definitely an example of bad practice in the use of citation data. That caused quite a fuss at the time, so you may have heard of it. So in terms of bibliometrics and gender inequity, bibliometrics, now that's the scientific analysis of the quality of academic publications, and that's using data on number of publications and the number of citations that a paper attracts. But this is challenged as an objective basis for decision making. So there was the high-profile case I just mentioned of sort of very poor, very bad use of citation data, and there was a very large international outcry. However, in our own institutions, there's routine use of citation data for hiring, for promotion and granting tenure, and for performance reviews. Okay, so we've sort of, you know, there's a dual aspect to it. On the one hand, we're saying, oh no, this is dodgy, don't use it, but it's quite normalized to use citation data. So the design, the way you put together bibliometric indicators can produce negative effects. So there are different citation practices for different fields, and you need to adjust for this context. And if you don't, it's apples and oranges, and unreflexive use of data can be incredibly harmful. Now, there's an example of the Chartered Association of Business Schools. They have a ranking of journals in which they prefer their business school members to publish in. And at one point, there were barely any journals that were relevant for research on feminist research or gender studies. So if your research area was falling outside of that ranking, that had big sort of career limiting consequences. But bibliometric data can actually be quite useful and can help to challenge gendered assumptions about academic practice. So, for example, we can find where gender is becoming mainstreamed in certain disciplines, such as sociology. There's data showing that in the Netherlands context, that early career researchers, the citation gap has kind of disappeared, but we kind of need to sort of longitudinally track to see if this continues into later career stages. And there was a study I was involved in here at Oxford, and I've got my name very faintly there because quite ironically, my name didn't appear on the publication, but I actually found that in terms of, it was a history of British sociology, and it was often felt that women did the soft research. However, it was women who did the most complex quantitative research found in that study. Anyway, I kind of got my own back because I did the index for the book, and for a laugh I put my own name in, and it never actually got removed. So I appear in the index more times than Durkheim, it's true. So best practice. In the ref, that's currently the 2021 ref, we're waiting for the results in May. 11 panels use citation data in the assessment of research quality. People may have heard of DORA, the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment. There's no mention of gender in DORA. There's the Metric Tide report by James Wilston for HEFCE, that it does mention gender, but there are no recommendations regarding gender. There's also the Leiden Manifesto about how to properly use bibliometrics, no mention of gender. An improvement, the International School on Research Impact Assessment, Pavel here involved, actually call for research institutions, funders, and evaluators to integrate gender equity into research funding, research design, and impact assessment. But I pose the question, who guards the guardians? Because we want more women actually to be on the policy side instead of just being practiced on. Okay, so to wind up, do we need a feminist bibliometrics? I would say yes, and following the example of feminist economics, accept that bibliometric data are socially constructed and we need indicator design to be gender sensitive. So this is a fresh approach to bibliometrics and research evaluation that exposes and removes gendered assumptions and biases. But what would this look like? Just quickly, transparency is an important element, and are we talking about liberal feminism or a more radical cultural feminism? So transparency, data on gender is not routinely collected by publishers, so even though we provide an ORCID ID, it identifies us uniquely, but personal data isn't connected. So very, sophisticated large data analysis relies on processing large data sets using gender assignment algorithms and even facial analysis algorithms, Freudian slip. So it's found that there is a lack of data transparency and reproducibility, that we just don't get access to this. A binary approach excludes transgender authors, which leads to misgendering. The error rate in assigning gender is unknown. The facial analysis is more likely to assign women with dark skin to be male. And so caution is needed to minimize objectifying the data results and not actually using it to reinforce existing inequalities. And the same applies for intersectional data. So I've nearly finished. Feminist bibliometrics, a liberal feminist approach, would work within the existing system and would seek to improve bibliometrics so that there's equitable treatment for all. So ensure that the data is contextualized and gender inclusive, and provide gender diversity on panels that use bibliometric data to arrive at judgments about research quality. Now, cultural feminism, I'm just taking as a broad term to mean a more sort of radical feminism. One approach would be to not have anything to do with it, to just reject doing bibliometrics and rankings. Or another approach would be to create new indicators based on feminist values such as inclusivity, compassion, and collegiality, and to have women-led panels using contextualized bibliometric data to arrive at judgments about academic research quality. So final slide, bit of a whirlwind tour. So there's extensive evidence in the literature of gender bias affecting women's academic career progression. The current collection of bibliometric data is not transparent or replicable and has unknown error rates and misgenders authors. The unreflexive use of this data can actually act to reinforce inequalities based on quality judgments. A liberal feminist bibliometric seeks best practice in data collection and analysis. There's the example of the Leiden gender rankings indicator, which looks at the proportion of female publications within a higher education institution. But we could also think about non-bibliometric indicators, so data on salaries, promotion rates, service burden, and culture. Or should a feminist bibliometrics introduce a disruption point, rip it up and start again? What would a radical feminist bibliometrics look like? But a good starting point would be for data providers to collect data from authors who autonomously define their own gender. Thank you.